I am Dr. Shamika Nguyen, the Executive Director here at the Center for Independence of the Disabled, New York, CIDNY. I want to welcome you to this historic event. We are celebrating 50 years of the decree at Willowbrook, and we want to take a look at what happened, how we got there, and where we're going. So the first thing I would like to talk about is CIDNY, the Center for Independence of the Disabled, and how we got here. We're going to show you a quick clip of what the Independent Living Center is all about, and essentially why we're here. From all the advocates that have really helped in trying to make sure that people with disabilities are integrated into society, moving the barriers has really established why CIDNY is here today and why we have a post-Willowbrook experience and why we continue to fight for disability rights for all New Yorkers living in New York City. So can we roll with the clip on the independent living? Thank you.
An extremely important realm to consider in our course is advocacy for education. And this was a means to chip away at the institutional barriers that separated people with disabilities from the community at large. By the late 1960s, there was increasing opposition by parents, by disability educators, and disability advocates to the status quo in education, and an increasing push for mainstreaming rather than isolating children in educational settings. This push was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1971, stemming from a 1969 lawsuit by the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens versus the state of Pennsylvania. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the state of Pennsylvania in 1972, which it sought to deny any obligation to educate children after the age of 8 if they did not meet certain intellectual standards. The Supreme Court ruled that the standards were the problem, not the children, and that the children had a right to free and equal education. Such effort and advocacy led to federal legislation on the issue. In 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed. Its name was changed later to the current Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, again reflecting changes in language and nomenclature. This law sought to ensure access to educational opportunities for all children, and this should be in the least restrictive environment that was fitting. That is, the starting point was not separation, but integration. Education was instrumental in providing pathways for opportunity, and this brings us back to the very start of our course with our introductory video on Ed Roberts. Recall how he had applied to UC Berkeley, but faced resistance both from the University of California and the state of California. The former did not want to let him enroll because of his disability, and the latter didn't want to pay for his education because it assessed that he was unemployable, you recall. Such was the state of society at the time that both judgments were considered not only reasonable, but also completely legal. So Ed Roberts had to fight the state of California and the University of California, and he overcame both. Ed's residence at UC Berkeley was on the top floor of the university's health center, the Cowell Hospital. And soon this trailblazer was joined by others, with a dozen students living there by 1969. For these college students, this was the first time away from home, and they experienced a new level of independence, a level of freedom from their families, and a new community of peer support. Now, this is not an unusual situation for anyone going to college. But when a new rehabilitation counselor tried to impose more stringent academic and conduct rules on this new community, the students mobilized in opposition. Since they were all wheelchair users, they named their group the Rolling Quads. Seeking to transition from an informal group to a formal campus organization, the group applied for and received an $80,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Education, which they used to launch the Physically Disabled Students Program, which would focus on issues of housing and accessibility for students. Fundamentally, the issue of concern was independence. People with disabilities have a right to live their own lives, to confront and address issues that restricted them, like housing and physical accessibility on campus, as well as the streets around the campus. So here they created an organization led by people with disabilities, serving people with disabilities. But how would they keep the program going once the grant was used up? This would require ongoing funding. For this, the group proposed a 25-cent student fee, and this was approved by the students of UC Berkeley. This student program then led to a community organization to expand the scope from the university to the city, and this was the emergence of the independent living movement. In 1972, thanks in part to a $50,000 federal grant, the Center for Independent Living was founded as a community-based organization led by people with disabilities and focused on the local community with a desire to influence the nation at large. To ensure that this would be a program led by and serving people with disabilities, the organization's bylaws state that the board would consist of 51% of people identifying as having a disability. At least 51%, that is. Now contrast this with the rise of the institutions that we have previously examined. The Center for Independent Living aimed at ensuring that people with disabilities could live lives that they directed, with access to housing and medical care and the surrounding environment. The approach of the Center for Independent Living was not to propose standards like federal and state laws, but to ensure that there was a process of asking and listening, that there was a community engagement. And we must ask, what is needed to help? The city of Berkeley listened to the growing movement and the protests that were happening at the time, and they were willing to ask this question, making city curbs accessible by adding curb cuts in the heart of the city. And then they declared that all new street construction would be made accessible, requiring that the city manager listen to community members before implementing any changes. An example of the need for listening can be seen in the case of the area's public transportation system. That is known as the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, or BART for short. In 1975, BART reached out to the Center for Independent Living, wondering why so few people with disabilities were using it after BART had installed elevators and braille signs and disabled parking. BART consulted with the CIL, the Center for Independent Living, and found that the problem wasn't entirely BART. While many people with disabilities had not used it before because it was inaccessible, now that the changes were made, what happened? Well, what they learned was that BART made wonderful changes, but the problem was, at the destinations, did those changes continue outside? That is, were there accessible buses? Were the sidewalks using curb cuts to make movement possible? And so what BART thought it solved only uncovered that there really was a bigger problem, and that came through the conversations. If accessibility was not possible outside of the BART station, then using BART was less likely. The process of asking and listening led to progress in the work of expanding access. The same year, 1975, the new director of the Center for Independent Living would continue this work and help expand this to a truly national level. the Center for Independent Living would become both a source of advocacy as well as a community of support as the independent living movement and the model of this Center for Independent Living spread nationwide. And that new leader's name was Judy Heumann. Thanks to the Americans with
All right. Thank you for taking the time to listen to that. I know that some of you are not used to coming to an independent living center, and it would be appropriate to kind of start this historical journey with understanding where the independent living movement came about. So we want to thank advocates like Bernard, people that spoke up, their parents, supporters in the community, for allowing this whole process of deinstitutionalization to make people realize that people with disabilities, if given the supports, can live independently in the community, can have jobs, can enjoy taking public transportation, going to the theater, going on a date, being able to exercise, being able to grocery shop, going to school, and doing all the things that human beings want to do, regardless of their disability status. So this is why we're here. We're here to acknowledge that Centers for Independent Living must continue. There's 41 independent living centers in New York State. There's over 400 in the United States. And we need to ensure that people with disabilities have a voice. Approximately 61 million people in the United States have a documented disability, and they are a big voting bloc. So it's important to understand that disability is a temporary situation. I should say able-bodied status is a temporary situation. Any one of us at any time can become disabled. Rather you're Republican, a Democrat, independent, if you're Black or white, if you're rich or poor, if you're gay or straight. So it becomes important as advocates for people to recognize that it's not us against them, it's really us together. So, in speaking about that, I want to take an opportunity to see if Brad Landa, who is our New York City Comptroller, is joined us yet. Is he here?
Rebecca is in the other room. I know she's gonna let him in as soon as he gets here.
I think
Is he here?
we're technically a little early, but I will summon him onto the Zoom.
Okay, perfect.
Give me a
Thank
few
you.
seconds to work my magic.
No problem. That's the next part of our presentation. And then we'll get into the panel, because I know you guys want to hear, not me speak, but our presenters, and also be able to ask those salient questions that we're just so dying to ask and interested in hearing the responses to. We'll get there shortly. Thank you for your patience.
It's coming.
Come. Great. All right, so further ado, we're going to hear from Brad Lander, New York City Comptroller, and our candidate for the mayor's office for the next election. We'll be here shortly.
Nice.
Hang on.
No, we're still waiting on Brad.
Okay. We always have to wait for the politician. You know how that goes.
Just go up there.
Sure, yeah, I think that would be great.
Should we hit it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Or is he logging on? Up there?
Okay, he is to your left, you guys are kind of.
All right, we're gonna do this a little bit in reverse order, but that's okay. Well, we have here a proclamation from the comptroller's office for Bernard Carabello, and I'm gonna read it out and then I'll hand it to you. For helping expose the inhumane conditions of Willowbrook State School and for fighting for every person with a disability to live in the least restrictive environment as possible, for the belief that people with disabilities are their own best self-advocates, and for mentoring countless people with disabilities in self-advocacy, for helping found the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State in 1986, an organization created to help people. Self-advocates build the skills and courage needed to speak up for themselves and others, for being an advocate at the OPWDD for 37 years, ensuring that people with disabilities get the services they need with dignity and respect, and making sure that what happened at Willowbrook never happens again, and for his tremendous contributions to the city of New York. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Where do you want us to put this? Do we go home?
Shall we,
Yeah.
Dr.
I'll.
I'm handing you the,
Oh, you give it.
yeah, we'll bring it over
Okay,
together.
I'm gonna give it to you.
Great.
Oh, sure. I'm blind, really.
Let's get a picture.
Yeah, get a picture.
We're home.
Oh, should I go?
Am I in the way?
What are we doing?
You want to be in the picture? Let's get you in the picture.
We can.
For over here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Why don't you get in the?
Yeah.
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 I'm gonna get naked as well. We're gonna get naked as well.
Oh, yeah, all right, absolutely. Jump in there a second.
Thank you.
Right on there.
I think we're having some difficulties on our end, but I am trying my best.
Okay, so if it's okay, I'm gonna move forward with the
Yeah.
program because he can
Yeah.
jump in. And I know we already have our guest speakers here. So I would like to introduce our guest speakers for this event. Bernard Carabello, as you guys should already know, gotten his award, so congratulations to you, Bernard. We have Geraldo Rivera. Hello, Geraldo.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for taking time from your vacation in the Caribbean to be with us. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's my wife's 50th birthday. We're celebrating as we celebrated Bernard's 75th a couple of weeks ago. Can you believe
Yes.
it's 75?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dr. Michael Wilkins was also going to be with us today, but he fell ill and has been hospitalized. So, and we don't know the status. We know that he's okay right now, but well, let's just say send our prayers and good wishes for him for a speedy recovery. But we also have Mr. Tim, I forgot, Casey. Thank you, Tim. Okay, Tim Casey, who was also worked at Willowbrook, and he was Bernard's social worker. So he will fill in for Dr. Wilkins, and we're so excited that he's able to be here with his lovely wife as well. So thank you. So we're going to start with the questions, and I wanted to just start with a reflection of Willowbrook. So the first question goes out to anyone on the panel. You can just answer. So Bernard, I'll start with you. So can you give us a little bit of taste? I know you've done this so many times, but kind of talk to us about Willowbrook and what it was like for you to be there. So for those young people who don't really know about it, give them a little flavor of what it was like. That's okay.
Willowbrook had about over 6,000 people in the whole institution. Every building had about 400 people. Every ward had about 80 people who were, and there were only 2 to 3 staff people to take care of all 80 people. And they had all kinds of disabilities. They had to be dressed, they had to be showered, they had to be fed. But the feeling that they eat something horrible. They fed the people. It took about 2 to 3 minutes just to feed one person. Well, what you or I would take about a half hour to 45 minutes. And that was about to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. So Geraldo, is it all right that I call you Geraldo? Or should I
Yes,
say?
please.
Okay, great. All right, you call me Dr. Sharon. How's that?
Okay.
So Geraldo, can you kind of tell us like how you went about finding about this story, finding out about this story, and what really attracted you to going to Willowbrook and trying to get this on the news?
I started in the news business in Labor Day 1970. I was previously an attorney. I am still an attorney, but for a group called the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican activist group in Spanish Harlem in New York. In that capacity, I met many of the volunteer doctors who were doing free breakfast programs, free lead paint poisoning programs, preschool education, just being, I thought the doctors and the others helping out were doing a wonderful job, got to know them, trusted them, Mike Wilkins among them. Mike was the lead guy. So I went to work in the news business. I got a call from these doctors I'd worked with as an attorney. They said, we want you to expose the conditions in an institution called Willowbrook. I had never heard of it. I had no connection with the disabled community. No one in my family had disabilities to note. It was something that when it was described to me, the conditions that Bernard alluded to just now, I didn't believe it, frankly, because it sounded too terrible. Not in New York City. It couldn't possibly be happening, right in plain view of the most progressive city on earth. So Mike said, you've got to come, you got to come and see what's going on here. And as I recall, it was on Bernard's 21st birthday. So now he's 75. Do the math. I mean, it's quite extraordinary how long the history of this saga has lasted. So Bernard turned 21, so he was freed from he was free to check himself out of the institution. So that was one of the reasons we decided to go to Staten Island to check it out ourselves. So they got me a key to one of the wards, the 6B. I still have the key. I opened the door and it was something that was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was the smell of it, the conditions, the way the children were being fed. Bernard said 2-3 minutes per kid. they needed a lot more than that. And the kids would, the young people mostly would, they were trained to just put their heads back and open their mouths, and the attendant would kind of shovel kind of a oatmeal-y mix into their mouths. And then the most common cause of death was pneumonia from the food getting in their lungs as they were force fed. So it's just a horrible, horrible thing. But you know, the great thing about it was meeting Bernard and forging a lifelong friendship. We even we joke that as we get older, we look more and more alike. The story hit like a cyclone in New York. It was one of the most profoundly moving, passionate responses to an expose ever in the history of television news, which wasn't that old back in 1972, January 1972, when the story was first produced. And people wanted, you know, from the parents led with Vicky Schneps and her group, and all the different parents and other advocates, Wilkins and Bronson and so many other people involved, wanted, all right, this is what it is. How can we fix it? And it started the crusade that you folks are the latest incarnation of. I think when I hear you and you know, just my continuing involvement in the story, lo, these many years later, I think that what the story has gone through phases, and I don't want to hog all the time, but basically it was the expose and the outrage and the horror. That was phase one. Phase two was, this is the way it is. It doesn't have to be this way. What's the alternative? And that evolved even further into the independent living movement, which is, you know, rather than the advocates doing all the heavy lifting, the people with disabilities themselves took more and more responsibility. And you know, Bernard is a classic example. I think of his life is one of the most noble achievements. Just the fact that he became an example, a crusader, a client advocate, a person who was obviously involved in fixing his own situation, but more importantly, working with others in New York State and elsewhere across the country. He led the way into this advocacy, self-advocacy, where the independent living movement and the people taking care, doing the best they can, take care of themselves, and insisting that the Americans with Disabilities Act be adhered to. I think that you can easily mark to those days the beginning of one of the most important civil rights movements of our time, and that is the movement for independent living.
Indeed. Mr. Casey,
Yes.
may I call you Tim?
Sure.
Great. Okay, Tim, why don't you give us your perspective? You did have the honor, I don't know if it's an honor, but you did work at Willowbrook. So what would you like to tell us about what it was like back then?
Well, in a word, it was horrible. I guess it's more than one word, but it was a terrible place. And I had graduated from college and went to graduate school, dropped out of graduate school. I needed a job. And back then, the state had a program where if you had a college degree, you'd take a test and then you'd be hired just for having a college degree. So I was Bernard's social worker at some point there. I always say that on my gravestone, it's going to say he was Bernard's social worker. but I had no training in social work. I technically was a social worker assistant. Yeah, that's right. We became very good friends over time. He became friends with my friends, which was great for all of us. But so the way I was living in Brooklyn at the time and got a letter saying, come visit Willowbrook State School, we have a job for you. And I went out there and I said, I drove onto the grounds and it was a beautiful looking place, all this grass and trees. You didn't see many people. They were all locked away in these really horrible buildings. And it was just a really, truly horrible place. It was overcrowded, understaffed. Those are the two most fundamental issues. And people just live in these giant wards, 30 or 40, 50 people sleeping in one room, in the ward room, the bedroom, I guess we'd call it. And during the daytime, they would be in the day room, basically just sitting on these plastic chairs, often with the TV blaring. And the thing I remember, one of the things I remember most about Willowbrook was, well, the smell. And I actually lost my sense of smell to sinus stuff about 20 or 30 years ago. But I still remember the smell of the Willowbrook wards, this combination, I think, of urine and feces. And you know, it was just a really horrible place. And part of the problem, of course, was, as I mentioned, was understaffing. But also the compensation for the employees wasn't good. They weren't paid very well. Benefits weren't very good. And I think that's one fundamental issue that's hopefully changed over time, is people caring for people with disabilities in institutions or group homes. Hopefully they're better compensated now. So I stayed there and I became active in the parent activism group. I guess I started in 1970, and then I left in September 1972 to go to law school. I had planned to be a social worker, and the state had a program back then called educational leave, where if you agreed to come back and work for them for 2 years, they pay for you your full salary while you went to social work school. And because I was somewhat involved with Bernard and the advocacy by the parents group, at one point, one of the administrators told me I was next in line for educational leave. I was told you'll get educational leave when hell freezes over. So I thought I could not wait that long. I went off to law school. Since then, I had actually grown up on welfare in New York City. And I had the very good fortune when I went to law school and started to work for a welfare rights legal organization. And I spent most of my next 40 or so years working on welfare rights issues and anti-poverty issues. And one thing I was thinking about as I came over here today was that there are three civil rights movements that I've been somewhat involved with over time: disability rights, gay rights, and welfare rights. And welfare rights, they don't exist any longer as a matter of law. They were all gone. And so there was no progress in the early 70s. Things had gone totally backwards. And I tried to think what made welfare go one way when disability rights and gay rights made good progress, still far short of where things should be. And in my mind, it came down to race. The public face of people who are poor and on welfare, black and brown, the public face of other movements, not so black and brown. So I think that was just in my own mind, a very important factor. Another point I wanted to just talk about was the importance of having protections for workers. Because I see at the federal level now, we have an administration that's trying to make all federal employees at will, which means if you're employee at will, that you can be fired anytime for any reason with no protection. And if that happens, we're not going to have whistleblowers. We're not going to have people who speak up about things that are wrong in the institution or us. We'll have some, but we won't have as many as we should. So that's, I guess, one message I wanted to share with you, my own thought of the importance of the horrible importance of racism in this country, and then the importance of giving employees some protection that if they speak up, they won't lose their jobs.
Yes, thank you. And we're definitely going to get to where we go forward. Oh, perfect. All right, we're going to take a minute, pause, folks. Brad Landa, thank you for joining us. How you doing, Brad?
Great, Dr. Sharon. It's such an honor to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to participate, to honor Bernard for his extraordinary years of advocacy and refusing to be silent about the conditions at Willowbrook. So we're deeply honored to present him with a commendation from the Controller's Office. And I'll talk about Nick Astor in just a minute, who I know brought and presented that. But this is an amazing powerhouse team. I mean, what a thrill for me to be on with Geraldo Rivera, who I, grew up with as a hero. Long before I knew, what Willowbrook really meant and what the expose did and how it, fused the power of journalism with the power of civil rights organizing, like Bernard and others were doing to change the world. And we need to remember those stories in these dark times. If you think, we sometimes can think now at this moment with Trump that we're just, oh, it's so hard. But think about what it was like for people at Willowbrook, and the guts to make change and believe it was possible was extraordinary. So, and I feel so lucky to be an ally in inheriting that tradition. And Dr. Sharon, what you and your team at CIDNY have done in lifting up the civil rights for sure, but in many ways more just the humanity of New Yorkers with disabilities, and helping us show that it's not just about being inclusive, it's about what the soul of New York City is, because when you've got a place like Willowbrook, you're corroding the soul of New York City. And when you have subways that are not accessible to people, that's not a subway system for all. And even when your sidewalks aren't accessible, if we don't have accessible sidewalks on the streets of our city, we're betraying what it means to be New Yorkers. And that means you all are holding up what it means to be New Yorkers. And we feel really honored by that. I want to add to my thanks, Dr. Michael Wilkins for fulfilling his Hippocratic oath by helping Geraldo bring the conditions of Willowbrook to the press. I'm sorry he's not able to be with you in the room today. And we in our office, in my last couple of years here, have really transformed our work on disability justice and accessibility. Prior to my tenure, there wasn't a specific person in the office who led that work. And I was so proud to hire Nick Astor, who's not just one person. He leads a team that involves auditors and budget specialists and contract specialists. And we're thrilled many of you have sat as part of our disability justice roundtable and said, what is going on with the express buses? How come they're not accessible? And you helped us do the field visits that I was proud to participate in. That report is coming out very soon, and I think you'll see it's a really strong one. And I just want to say we were delighted to be your partners in the Disability Pride Parade, and we are going to continue working with you. It doesn't matter what happens in Washington. Pushing forward in Bernard's honor is our responsibility at this moment in time. And I feel so proud to do it. And I'll just close with one thing that I wasn't planning on talking about, but what Bernard, what you said really gets at this, because I'll take the example of at-will employment. It is scary right now what is happening in the federal government in an effort to push everyone to be an at-will employee. Of course, most Americans who don't work for a city government or unfortunately aren't in a union are at-will employees. New York City, when I was in the city council, became the first city in the country to push back. And we started with fast food workers who were facing unfair firings. And in New York City, fast food workers are not at-will employees anymore. They have what are called just cause protections. They could only be fired for a reason. And that meant when Chipotle workers got fired, supposedly for no reason, but really for organizing a union, they were violating the law of New York City. And we could make New York City the first place to have a law that all employees in New York City have just cause protections, regardless of who your employer is. Most European countries are like that. Canada's like that. So in this time when the federal government is not on the side of civil rights, is not on the side of disability justice, is not on the side of worker protections, more than ever, we need New York City to be on the side of disability justice, on the side of workers' rights, on the side of civil rights. And you are pushing us to do that with the example, and Dr. Sharon with your advocacy and fight. And I'm so grateful for it. And I promise to keep showing up and be your partner in it. Nick has been doing an amazing job, and I'm thrilled he's there with you today. He's a bridge, of course, but he's a bridge over which a lot of us are working hard to partner and travel. So Bernard, congratulations. Thank you to everyone in the room, to CIDNY, and to all of you. We are not going back. We are fighting forward, and you all are leading the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said, well said. So I feel that I have to acknowledge, being the executive director here, that we are just cause as well. You know, independent living centers, are at will, but here at CIDNY, if someone is being terminated, they're being terminated because they're not doing their job. And to me, that's very important, because we are responsible for 1.5 million people living in New York City who have disabilities. And we have 120 staff members here. We have a board of directors. Our board chair, Sunita, is here. And one of our board members, our secretary, Ethan Addis, is here as well. And we also have another board member, Freda. Are you here, Freda?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have 3. Remember, I can't see, so if I didn't say anybody else, I'm sorry. But so we are the disabled community. We have about 60% of our staff are disabled. We have 51% of our board members are disabled. And we live, breathe disability, because we understand that it's really hard for people with disability to get employed. And if we don't hold our staff, I'm gonna say, if I don't hold my staff accountable for the work that they do to help all these New Yorkers, then they don't need to be here. That's my job. So we work for you, because if it wasn't a consumer, we wouldn't be here. So we thank each and every consumer that comes through the door, and they need our help. And that's why we're here. So thank you. Okay, let's get back to the panel and questions. Okay, so we, yes, go ahead, Mr. And Bernard is on the board too. I'm sorry, he's on our board. Go ahead, that's why we're honoring you, Bernard. But go ahead, Bernard.
The Congress, did they reinstate Medicaid?
Yes. Did they reinstate Medicaid? We're on the tap right now. Yes, it's on. It's flowing. It's flowing. All right, I know, right? Yes. Well, we're gonna keep fighting. And I'm so glad you just set it up so perfectly. We have all these people here. So let me roll into it now. Okay. So part of it, we're talking about the future and the past and all of that. Right now, advocacy is so needed. Okay. We need your support. We need your help, because like I said, 41 independent living centers here in New York State, and we all get federal funding. We need those federal dollars, okay? Because essentially the services that we provide, housing, education help, employment assistance, food assistance. We got people here hungry, okay? We help them get those applications. We help people get on, Social Security if they need it, because not everybody can work if they have a disability. But those that can, we get them jobs too, okay? So the whole point of it is that all of this is being under attack. And like I said, disabled people can look just like you and me or somebody else. So your time will come when you're disabled and you want some money, somebody to help you, want to come to CIDNY, okay? So help us stay in business. Join us by advocacy. We have a big advocacy day, February 4th. We're going up to Albany. We got a bus. If some of you people want to take a day off, come with us. If you can't, come on, cough up some dollars, because we need support. Go to CIDNY.org/donate and help us out, because your dollar is going to save my life and your life. So come on, let's do it. All right, let's get back to the panel. Thank you. I just had to get on my soapbox, because it wouldn't be me if I don't do that, right? Okay, so let me do that. All right, getting back to Geraldo. Mr. Geraldo, are you still there?
I'm still here.
All right, perfect. So the next question is going to you. So tell me what kept you engaged with being with Bernard and following his journey, because it's been 50 years and that's incredible to maintain a friendship with Bernard. So what kept you engaged and what kept you trying to advocate for people with disabilities?
Oh, he's not so bad. He's pretty easy to be friends. We love each other. We started understanding that we needed not only an example to shoot for in terms of, we began with the group home idea, but we needed to fund them. We needed to, to have a viable network of facilities available If you're going to deinstitutionalize, you're going to close these institutions, where is the population going to go? And many of these disabilities, these are 24/7. You've got to have, it's very labor intensive. It's very expensive. And the people who work there need a living wage. Otherwise, they won't go to those jobs. They won't go to work in any of these facilities. What we don't want, God forbid, is like a mini Willowbrook situation with some of these group homes. I think that with Bernard is an ideal in many ways. He's almost an idea, aside from being my dear friend and my brother from another mother. He's he is an example of someone who was suppressed and silenced by a system that was I don't even fault the people that worked in the system. They were overburdened, underpaid, disregarded. I totally get it. They weren't the enemy. What we had to do was to, first of all, we needed seed money. So we started with my friend John Lennon, did a concert with Stevie Wonder. Remember that one, Bernard? At Madison Square Garden, and then John Denver and Roberta Flack and Shana Na and Marshall Tucker Band and the Allman Brothers. So we did a series of years of concerts that raised funds that we used to open and sustain group homes. And then after the concert phase, I started boxing the Wall Street charity guys who were raising funds. And I would fight whoever was the highest bidder. And then as I started getting too old for that and getting beat up too much, then we started the golf tournament with Life's Work, a wonderful organization headed by Vicki Schneps. I mentioned Vicki earlier. Vicki had a daughter who died in Willowbrook, Lara. So the network of the pioneers from that era, from that extraordinary event, have in many ways stayed pretty close, considering it's been a half a century. And we want it very much to what the community wants, rather than imposing, my vision of what an ideal system would be. But there's always going to be budgetary pressures. There's always going to be the need to keep vigilant and don't let standards slip. There's got to be just a coming to Jesus moment where we understand that people with disabilities, everybody has something, but we're all in this together. We should work together and don't segregate anyone. Don't presuppose what their abilities are. Let every person be all they're capable of becoming. And I think that the Americans with Disabilities Act has been extraordinary. This stuff with President Trump right now, and it's very distressing. It causes, Medicaid is closed for the day. It causes upset. It causes anxiety. Here we are. We need people to have raises, and instead, we're fighting for survival. Glad the Medicaid situation just proved to be political propaganda, but glad that that's back. But eternal vigilance, love, compassion. I tell it this way, and this is something that has marked my life since those days, the day I met Bernard in that diner in Staten Island. When I see someone with a disability, obvious disability, someone in a wheelchair, or someone with Down syndrome, or cerebral palsy, whatever, a kid working with his or her parent, when I see, they look at me in the eye and I look at them in the eye, and I know them and they know me. They know that we get it and we want the world to get it. Never again will this community be forlorn and forsaken. Never again will this community be ignored and given short shrift. But it is something that Now we passed it on generation and generation and generation. We're still doing the golf tournament. We're in about our 40th year in the golf tournament. Everyone's got to be involved though. Everyone's got to be involved, be vocal, be reasonable, but be persistent. Fight for justice. Equality is not just a political phrase. I loved hearing the city controller. I thought that he spoke very, very well. I wish him the best. But New York has got to be, Willowbrook is a shame that is a ghost that should haunt every New York City person. The fact that grew into one of the world's largest institutions for that population, then described with the R word. It should have never happened. We can never let it happen again. We have to be eternally vigilant, work hard, and don't get steamrolled by other priorities, elbowing this community aside. You've got to fight for your right. And there's no better voice than the disabled community themselves, I believe. It is the honor of my life. And
Well said, sir.
I feel that, it made my life worthwhile. So I'm delighted.
Well said. So the people are clapping.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna resume my honeymoon if I may. Bernard, may I, Erica's 50th birthday, may I go celebrate me? Okay. Love you. Again, happy birthday to you.
And thank you, Geraldo. We
Thank
appreciate
you very much. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I wanted to, I think he's left it at a very poignant spot because we know the bad, we know the ugly, but we also need to think about how we rebuild and what we're doing now. So I'm honored that we have governmental officials here representing the state. From the governor's office, we have Kim Hill. Governor Hochul actually was the first governor. I got to give her credit. She heard the disability community, and she realized that this people with disabilities need a chief disability officer, and she, so gracefully, excuse me, nominated Kim Hill, and she's an advocate, she's a believer, she's a person with a disability, and I just wanted to give her a moment to say a few words. Ms. Hill.
Hi, everybody. I am Kim Hill Ridley, the Chief Disability Officer for Governor Hochul. Also want to introduce Commissioner Willowbrook, who's been right next to me. And yes, I know Bernard. So Commissioner Bear and I do a ton of work together to represent the entire disability community on behalf of Governor Hochul. It was the honor of my life when Governor Hochul decided to create the office and hire me. I have also had a tremendous honor of hiring an amazing team that surrounds me. I don't think that any of us do anything on an island. We are all, like Geraldo said, in this together. Holly and Ben are here with me. My husband is in the other room, and Deb Ellis also in the other room from OPWDD. We're all really excited to be here. We were lucky enough to be on site at Willowbrook earlier this morning, where the governor, Willow, has very excitedly been able to announce that the governor is making a very large investment of $75 million, both in funding for the IBR Research Center and to create a state-of-the-art learning center at the actual site of Willowbrook. Bernard was there with us and said some amazing words, as did Willie Mae Goodman, mom of Marguerite, right? Another one of the people who lived at Willowbrook for a long time, and there are some other friends, family members, other elected officials from Staten Island. So we are very excited to be moving forward with honoring Willowbrook for what it was and taking the lessons learned there to never let anything like that happen again in New York, certainly, but hopefully anywhere in the world. So thank you for having us. Willow, did you want to? Yeah, say a couple words.
No, I think, hi, everybody. Sorry, I got my back to you. I think you covered it and you stole my thunder with my announcement. So
Sorry.
we had such a good event this morning. The idea of the $75 million is to modernize the Institute for Basic Research, and to make state-of-the-art laboratory abilities, a genomics core facility to provide genetic testing for people with disabilities. There's been a lot of scientific advancement in the world of genetic research and how we can use genetic testing earlier in someone's life to predict long-term health outcomes, particularly for people with developmental disabilities. So we're really excited about the governor's investment in the research capability. And then, as Kim mentioned, creating the Willowbrook Center for Learning, where we will take all of those artifacts and archives that people have saved, create sort of a museum, a shared conference space for the community to use, a training center for staff who are working with people with disabilities, to really sort of take what was the darkest part of our history and make it a learning moment that goes on forever, and to really document how important it was to the nation and to the disability rights movement, what happened there. And so we don't ever forget that history. So we're really excited about it. And this is a great event. Thanks for inviting us.
Points, and then we're gonna open it up to questions. So we know that the movement is still strong and is still needed. There's still a lot of inequities that people with disabilities face. Our employment rates are still low. We're still living in the poverty rates. Most people with disabilities are living below the poverty rate. We're still having, for some of us, have to depend on, basic welfare services. And we still have a society that is extreme with level of stigma and prejudice against someone that have intersectionality of race, disability, gender, sexual orientation. So there's still a lot of fight left and still much work to be done. So I wanted to just, talk to you, Kim, for a second. Maybe you could kind of talk to, I have a question for you. She didn't know about this question, but but she has the knowledge. She has the knowledge. It's not a trick question. I just want to highlight the employment piece, because we all know that for people to climb out of poverty, you have to be trained, you have to have the social emotional intelligence to really go about making yourself feel that you can do it, have someone behind you, but you need opportunities. So maybe you could just tell the crowd, what Governor Hochul's initiatives. I know she has a lot of initiatives of trying to increase the employment rate for people with disabilities in New York State. And I think a lot of us, well, I know what it is, but a lot of these people don't know. So can you tell them, please?
Yeah,
Take
sure.
the time.
Be happy to. I think I'm probably talking about these things in my sleep at this point.
Right, sure.
Definitely. So when I was hired, Governor Hochul made it very clear that increasing the employment rate of people with disabilities is one of her top priorities. We came in exceptionally strong with being able to expand the Medicaid buy-in program. Fingers crossed that goes into effect any day. That is going to allow people with disabilities to earn significantly more than the current program already does, up to about $615,000 and have over $300,000 in assets. So as soon as that goes into effect, we will be working with obviously all of the independent living centers to make sure that that word gets out, as well as all of the local departments of social service. What?
No.
Jump in.
There's also a component where spousal income is
Oh,
excluded,
Yeah,
so
got it.
one
Yeah.
can get married.
Yep, and we have exempt the age of 65 so that people can work beyond the age of 60. Obviously, a lot of people still are. Thank you. And Ben and Holly and Willow, jump in, or I'm forgetting things for sure. So we're very excited about that. We then quickly moved to the governor signing an executive order declaring New York State as a model employer. So that means that she is trying to bring people with disabilities into the state workforce. We have lots of things going on in that space. So if you all have people that are interested in working for the state, just get in touch with us and we can help move people either through civil service, through the 55BRC program in the state, but you guys have 55A down in the city. Yep. Or you get in touch with any of your other service providers who should be aware of this executive order as well. This past September, the very 11th hour, Governor Hochul signed an executive order 40 committing New York State to be an employment first state. We are very close to announcing an employment first director, and 2 other positions will follow to really put New York State on the map as far as employment first, both with the New York State government and hopefully with a lot of our private employers. New York is very lucky to have some of the biggest companies in the world call New York home. And we also have a lot of independent and small employers. We're going to be working with all of them, hiring a business liaison to kind of bridge that gap and get them to sign on to the governor's commitment to employ people with disabilities and to presume that employment should be that first outcome, that there should be no other outcomes for people with disabilities. We have taken a huge step in partnering with New York City and AHRC in expanding the partnership for inclusive internship program. Mary Beth, who is, I know watching this, she's our inclusive internship coordinator back home. She's watching this. If any of you have any inkling or desire of wanting to be an intern in New York State or in the city, you can get in touch with her and she will get you in touch with the right people. So happy to partner Sharon with you on that as well. And as we move forward, both with the most integrated setting coordinating council that is responsible for homestead implementation, obviously employment's a big part of that. We expect to be developing a lot of other employment initiatives as well that will hopefully start to really move the needle, and also collecting the data so that we can tell if our efforts are working. The one thing that I strongly encourage people with disabilities to do now that I think it's very clear, at least in New York State, that we are welcome to hiring people with disabilities. If you are a person with a disability, we urge you to I don't want to say declare yourself as a person with, identify yourself to your employers. We very much presume that there are more people working with a disability than we are aware of. And when you identify yourself in that way, it helps us build our numbers. And it also helps identify the accommodations that we need to make it a palatable place to work. I think, did I miss anything?
There's a couple of other things in this year.
Oh, yes, in the state of the state and the budget. Yes, we have a couple of things. Hopefully expanding the employment tax credit for people with disabilities. It has been our understanding that the amount was not enough and the paperwork was too burdensome. So we are doing some work to alleviate both of those problems. What else? I feel like, what else am I missing?
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
So one of the things that I want to acknowledge is the fact that the course of disability has changed greatly. These independent living centers initially was really built about physical barriers, but we know now that the incidence of disability is more for hidden disabilities. So I want to compliment Governor Hochul in acknowledging mental health disabilities and her initiative in trying to recognize that we must start young. We have a great mental health epidemic among our young people. She's very happy about taking away cell phones in schools. She's talking about that, and also putting money into hiring more mental health clinicians to help in dealing with bullying and dealing with the despair that our young people face. People need to recognize that according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is a physical and mental impairment that substantially limits major life activity. So people that have mental health disabilities, here at CIDNY, we have more people coming in with that diagnosis, and they need to come and get help. You don't have to live in isolation and not get the treatment that you need. So I want to thank Governor Hochul for that. And also, I got a toot CIDNY's horn, so let me do that. Okay, so we have developed a a mental health, multicultural disability competency training program for licensed clinicians, social workers, licensed mental health counselors, and psychologists, because we know that you don't know much about disability. But these patients, these clients, consumers, whatever you want to describe them to be, are coming to you for help. So it's very important for you to understand the intersectionality of disability and how that works in your private practice, your clinic, whatever your telehealth treatment, your virtual platform, what have you. So come to CIDNY, pay $99 for 6 credits, and we'll teach you. Eric and myself will do our best to make sure that you're disability competent. So thank you for that. So thank you.
You're welcome. I want to
ahead.
give a shout, the employability pledge that OPWDD has. So that's existed 3 years.
This is the third.
Yeah, 3 years now, and I expect with the Employment First initiatives that we're going to do a lot to build that out, build that list, and hopefully have a bunch of organizations a part of it. Ben, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ben Tapa. I work for Kim Hill with the, we are trying to do in the state a proposal to connect new ASL interpreters with experienced mentors, because we found out that about 50% of new interpreters leave the industry within 2 or 3 years of graduating. That there's a lot of pressure to survive and thrive as a freelance interpreter, and we recognize that New York State can do more to address this nationwide shortage. We're going to try and do a pilot program centered on the capital region in central New York, but hopefully this will succeed and provide access to the deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people who really rely on these interpreters.
So that would, good point to shout out that this past January, our office opened a deaf, blind, and hard of hearing office. We have an executive director who is deafblind and a full-time ASL interpreter that covers all deaf, blind, and hard of hearing issues along with Ben. So, please keep us as a resource, keep OPWDD, OMH as a resource. We're all here too.
Great. Let's take some questions from the panel and also online. Who's gonna help me with that? I can't see your hands.
Jeff is gonna help with the questions, because I'm gonna go.
We have a comment, so it'll be fast, so I'll read the comment first. This is from Edward Krugman. This is not a question, but a comment, and I'm sorry Geraldo left before I could say it. My late wife worked at Willowbrook as an intern while getting her MSW. It was just after the consent decree and part of the implementation, a huge impact on our lives. But I want to point out how far we've come and more to do. But this should be a time of celebration in part of something that over 50+ years, society has tried to do right. I litigate on behalf of the IDD community. There is a ton of work to do, but we are building a base that could not exist without the heroes who did Willow. That is just a comment.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that comment. Yes, indeed.
So first question comes from Monica Ortiz Soloway. Monica asks, as a social worker / professor at CCNY, which I believe is the City College of New York, Center for Worker Education, what is something that this community wants them to know?
The community of this, which community? The disabled community?
Disabled community, people with disabilities, yes.
I would say, I'm gonna answer based on what I think, and then I hope people will jump in, because we have a lot of disability experts in the room, not just me. I would say, I want you to treat me like the way you want to be treated. I'm a woman, I'm a person, I have feelings. I cry just like anybody else, and I want to be liked like anybody else. So don't see my disability, see me as a person. What does someone else want to say? Okay.
Yes, I would say recognize my strengths. Don't focus on the deficiencies. Focus on my strengths and enable me, make the accommodations, find the modifications that I need.
Else? Just yell, because I can't. Yeah.
No other comments
No
from
other
anybody here? Okay, we have another question.
Okay.
From Roberta Bernstein. What initiatives are in the works for people with disabilities with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Well,
So very broad question.
yeah. Willow, you want to try?
Sure, I wasn't expecting to answer questions, but always happy to.
Yeah.
I mean, we at OPWDD have been so busy, trying to launch our new vision for the agency, our new strategic plan, making sure that we have capacity from staff. We suffered from an incredible staffing shortage for a long time, so we've had a lot of initiatives focused on recruiting and retaining staff, making money available to raise wages of frontline staff to make sure that they're available to support people in anything that they need. That being said, focusing as much as possible on making sure that we are moving away from the longstanding traditional institutional types of services and moving people into community-based integration, putting employment first as the real first choice for just about anybody that comes into the OPWDD system. And if they are unable or uninterested in working, making sure we have other meaningful things for them to do during the day. We have a lot of volunteer programs and connecting people to faith-based organizations and making sure that there's ways for people to live a life that looks like the way they want it to. In this year's executive budget, if that's what the question was focused on, the governor, in addition to the $75 million proposal at the Institute for Basic Research, also included a $25 million investment to enhance healthcare services for people with developmental disabilities. So those would be capital grants that we would give out to health clinics to be able to create more accessible access to healthcare and specialty services and equipment. So that's another initiative that's in this year's budget that we're really excited about.
I do. We need to keep on drop cash there. We need that. Pay a decent salary because of our people needed of argument of all of them are single parents and they got 4 or 5 kids. They can't support their kids when they're making $18 an hour. It should go up to $25 an hour.
Yeah.
That's why we're not keeping the people that we need to keep because they just can't afford to work with our people.
Yes.
And we need to start advocating for that.
Yeah, I think that living wage is such an important point. So I'm glad you mentioned it because I failed to reference this $850 million investment that the governor just made that was announced very recently. And that money is to bring up wages from starting at $17 an hour closer to what a living wage should be in New York State for those workers. So we were really, really proud of that.
Right.
Yes, that's great. CIDNY supports removing sub-minimum wage for people that are used to be in these day programs, I'll just call them shelter workshops, that's what they were. And we recognize that every person who wants to work at whatever rate they can work needs that level of socialization and involvement, and their work matters, and they should earn a decent wage. So we need to put that forward. And also too, in addition to the direct care workers, because we're specifically talking about increasing the wage for direct care workers working in OPWDD funded institution, I should say organizations. I'm not gonna call them institutions, organizations, okay? But we also have home health care for people who have disabilities, and they need their direct care worker to take care of them too, their home health attendant to take care of them too. And we know that we've been pushing for higher wages because the work is hard, but the work is very meaningful because you get to really connect with an individual. But at the same time, some people can work at Starbucks and get paid more than working with someone that really needs them. So we need to look at that and acknowledge that we have to do better. I'll just say it like that. Next question?
Did you wanna?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, it's a negative note, but one thing that I'm certain we will see from the new administration is efforts to cut the Social Security, SSI disability rolls. It will make it harder to have an application accepted. They'll increase the termination rate and they'll lengthen processing time. So there'll be a real need to keep an eye on what's going on with the federal disability programs that provide income support for some of the people.
So let me turn that into a positive, okay? Because we're also celebrating Bernard's birthday, so let's try to step it up a little bit. Okay, so you are right, sir. And we need to look at keeping the eyes on the pot. But at the same time, that's what advocacy is all about. So we need to put our eyes on it, but we gotta also step up with our voices. I mean, we elected these people. Some of us did, not all of us, some of us did. So, okay, Bernard. So what I'm saying is that if you see that this is an issue, then you join CIDNY and other organizations and let's fight. Because you can't tear down SSI, SSDI without a fight, because we have millions of people that need the money, okay? So let's go to Washington and let's do what we need to do. But we just can't give up and just be complacent, because that's what got us here. I just had to say that. Okay, one more question, then we're gonna have to
Wait,
sing.
This is
Okay.
a two-part question that we have.
Oh, someone.
Just hold on 1 second. We have this is a.
One second, one second,
This is a.
one second.
This is a two-part question from Katie Favre. Katie says, it's, I think, a very quick answer. 2 parts. First part, do the independent living centers provide supports and services for people with intellectual disabilities who cannot self-advocate? That is the
Yes,
first part.
that's easy.
There
Yes.
you go. Yes, that is it. Katie, thank you for
Thank you,
asking.
Kate. Yeah.
The second half of it is regarding employment for people with more significant disabilities who cannot work competitively. What models of employment will include them in the workforce at a minimum wage rate? Maybe we can't answer that now, I don't know, but what is it we have?
We have 2 options. We have supportive employment, depending on their needs, and their need for job coaching. Or we have customized employment, and one of our board members, Freda, used to be the executive director of Job Path, which was kind of, want to say a little something about that, Freda? Like how jobs have.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that customized employment is really intended as a way to help people who maybe previously haven't been considered candidates for employment. It's a way of helping them identify the skills and the talents that they can bring to the workforce, and then work with a provider who can work with an employer to create a job that works for both. So it's a technique that works for the employer and works for the individual. It's about a good job match, and it's very effective.
Thank you.
Okay, and so for the people online, I guess we said we're done with the questions here, but everybody who has questions, we only have 2 from Peggy and Carol. We will answer your questions, and you can also email us at info@cidny.org for anybody who has any questions regarding this or anything else. So that is done on there.
Okay, so yes, who wants to say something back? I can't, I don't know who it is, I'm sorry.
Sister Dr. Sharon, first of all, I'd like to thank you and your staff who is doing the signing for us, your staff that's doing the electronic and media, all the folks behind the scenes sometimes, not all the folks, but many times people that have made the atmosphere, made the environment an egalitarian environment aren't being seen or heard as well. So I thank you and your staff. I am going to comment and share with you my experience with Willowbrook, but I want to just preface my remarks is I'm only explaining, not complaining. I'm good to go without a show. But I'm seeking liberty and not sympathy, and I think I share that with everyone here. And before I get started, so I don't get cut off, I want to thank and acknowledge Bernard, and maybe we'll have something to contribute later about his birthday. I want to thank Miss Ridley and congratulate her, and glad that she has the support of her husband and Miss Ellis, who's joining her. And I just want to say that I began, I'm Pastor Michael Vincent Crea, C-R-E-A. My human rights ministry is ONE, One World Life System, serving one love and developing one world for the common good of humanity. Started in DC in 1990 when I witnessed people in wheelchairs getting arrested in Senate office buildings. And I think we have to reclaim our motto, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. On that, I just pulled this up this morning. I first visited Willowbrook as a child at 8 and 9 years old. But then at 15, another member of our Monsignor Farrell track team on Staten Island got his first job. I was 15, his brother, that was Joe Carney. Jim Carney was 15, I was 15, Jimmy Hall was 15. And we were on the track team during the summer, we ran cross country. We ran out to see where Joe worked because Joe said, you have to see where I work. You won't believe it. I'm gonna read what I sent. It's just a paragraph, actually two, but it gets on to what Mr. Rivera was speaking about, what Controller Lander spoke about, and then we just finished with just two or three solutions, as I say. Now, this was sent out June 26, 2019 to our former New York City Liberties attorney, Norman Siegel, and says, now, dear Norman, peace, I'd like you to represent me in the instant matter of being immediately returned to the home of my heart, blood, sweat, and tears of 3 years. Not only standing up with myself and Taranga is my service dog, and taking care of 2 elders, and she was needing help here in New York. No one would give it to her, and I was forced into a Sophie's Choice, and she was put to death. Not only standing up with myself and Taranga, you being my advocate shall start now, never again, for all whom Hitler called, quote unquote, unfit. Like those young souls I witnessed at 15, 1970, naked, twisted, tormented, and tortured on the cement floors of Willowbrook State School, Staten Island, before anyone knew who Geraldo Rivera was to make a household name, but still without housing as a human right, especially all living with single quotes, DISD, dist abilities. Like those now that Meryl Streep used her access at the awards show to raise up, still not being heard nor seen, as Trump's own administration implements the Giuliani template of tyranny across the country as a model for autocratic rulers on each and every continent, and egregiously against the very cosmic atmosphere encompassing Earth and taking the breath away from each and all of us yearning to breathe freely.
Okay, sir.
And I just ask this, between fight and flight is freedom. And we don't fight for our rights, which are law. We need to demand them.
Okay.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I agree with you that we should advocate and we should lobby and we need to make our voice heard.
Well,
Thank you. So I'm just gonna stop there because we're running out of time.
Doctor, I don't want old coffee put into new filters, so I would gladly meet later or with Miss Ridley, but we need human rights courts.
Yes.
Why can a property pimp order anyone into court in 15 days and out of their home in 30, and we wait 2, 3, 4 years until someone like Luigi Mangione decides it's too much? So we have to have responses to our rights in 15 days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay, so we're running out of time and we have a lot of food and we have a beautiful cake. that we
Yeah.
bought for Bernard. So if you could join
Wow.
me, is the cake in here? Okay,
Okay,
perfect, thank you. So I want you all to join me online and in the room, and let's sing happy birthday. You ready? On the count of 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. So Bernard, we thank you for serving on our board. We thank you for being a disability rights advocate. We thank you for speaking up about Willowbrook. And we thank you for a future relationship where you will make CIDNY do what we need to do to make life better for people with disabilities. So thank you so much. Let's cut the cake.